Today, we're going to be talking about inspiring action and how volunteer stories can drive recruitment and engagement. And again, my name is Gung. I'm one of the co-founders here at Civic Champs. We're a volunteer management platform. And so here's some logos that I'm associated with. I like to say, the important ones are probably the ones on the bottom. I had two other startups in the past, but really want to do something that had a bit more social good. And so that's how we end up with Civic Champs. This is the industry or sector that I've loved the most, and mostly that's because of you all and how friendly and kind you all have been and patient with us as we develop our platform. So that's me. But today I am more excited to introduce our guest, Jennifer, who is with VolunteerMatch. She's got I had a chance to watch one of Jennifer's presentations in the past, so thought it was fantastic and wanted to invite her to join us for a webinar to share that experience with you all. So Jennifer, I'll let you sort of introduce yourself a little bit more.
Sure. My name is Jennifer. I am the Director of Education and Training at VolunteerMatch. I got my start in the wildlife rehabilitation and conservation nature education space, so doing direct service, and then went to go work with the Bar Association of San Francisco, really thinking about how to help law firms put their pro bono programs into practice. So I sort of come from both sides. When I came to VolunteerMatch, my goal was really my goal when I started was to help everyone use the platform better. And what we found was, in fact, there's a lot of need out there for ideas and resources and templates. And from that, the Learning Center was born. And that's where most of my work is. Although I do also get to now, again, travel and see people in person again, which is really nice. I am a CVA, which means I'm certified in volunteer administration. If you're not familiar with the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration, that is sort of like letters you can add after your name if you work in the volunteer engagement space. It's an exam. They offer it twice a year. And it really just shows that you know what you're talking about and that you've, done some work. You've got some experience. You have to have 3 years in the field leading volunteers before you can sit for the exam. And then I see that you put the podcast up. Some of you might be familiar with Toby Johnson from Volunteer Pro. She and I started a podcast. Our first season was 2020, and we're taking a little bit of a break right now. But I'm hoping we can sort of get back into the swing of the podcast. It's hard. It's sort of neither one of ours first job, second job. It might be our third job to do the podcast. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's awesome. I'm sure our volunteer managers can certainly relate to that in terms of the different hats that you have to put on. So
yeah.
All right. Well, real quickly here, in terms of logistics, we often get these questions, so we will send the slides and recording to you all afterwards. So no need to take lots of notes. The presentation is going to be about 30 to 40 minutes. Probably today about 45 minutes is the plan. And if you want to put questions in chat, I'm going to be monitoring that throughout. And we might get to it right then, or maybe we'll save it at least for the end for Q&A. So please do put your questions in chat, and we'll make sure we get to that. And of course, stay till the end as always for some freebies. We have some cool things to share with you all there. So with that, I'll actually turn it back over here to Jennifer. Jennifer, if you want to share your screen, and I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. Sorry, y'all. I should have been a little bit more prepared here.
Yep, perfect.
There we go. All right. So, oh shoot, I think I need to unshare and share my audio as well so we can listen to the video. Yeah. Oh, here we go. I got it. All right. Okay. So we're going to talk today a little bit about how we tell stories especially when we think about bringing volunteers into our organization. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we might be able to tell stories sort of in ongoing work that volunteers are doing. And you might be doing some of this. Then you might be doing some reporting. There might be some numbers that you track or an annual story that you put out. But we're going to sort of think a little bit more about where stories show up and really what stories we're telling, what we're prioritizing. As I mentioned, we'll go sort of through how to get through just numbers. Sometimes when we talk about volunteer engagement, we might say something like, oh, we have this many volunteers and they've given us this many hours. I like to think of that as sort of just a teaser. Excuse me, there's so much more that can go into the story that we tell. We're then going to talk about where we can share that story. So what do we think about when we build a story? What's our story arc? Sort of what's that journey we take people on when we tell the story of volunteer engagement? Why volunteers matter, what's different or better in our organization because we engage volunteers. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can incorporate storytelling into our recruitment activities, our retention or relationship building activities, and how we can inspire others, both our volunteers as well as others who are connected with our organization, either internally or externally. So I'm just going to start with this big question, and we're going to talk about this today as we go through, and we have some polls, and I have some ideas to share with you. But our big question for today is, what story do you tell to volunteers? And I would guess, I would say that sort of following up on that big question, there are a couple of sub questions. First, is that story centered on volunteers, or are we telling a story to volunteers that doesn't include them? And then the next question I might ask as we think today is that story serving you? Is it serving your organization? Is it helping prepare volunteers when they hear that story during your recruitment messaging or your orientation? Does it help them understand what the work's going to be like or why that work matters? And as you build that relationship with volunteers, does that story sort of keep them engaged or keep them coming back, inspire them to continue that work? And so, again, as we go through today, think about that, or think about that now as we ask what kinds of words would you want your volunteers to use to describe volunteering with you? And just this can sometimes be thought of as a word cloud. It doesn't even have to be complete sentences. Just a couple of words that sort of come to your mind. I know for me, I want my volunteers, after they're done with volunteering with me, to feel inspired. I want them to feel excited. I want them to think, gosh, that was really fun, or to know that they've made a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, oftentimes it's around, the word impact comes to mind as well, Jennifer, right? So, did I have an impact, meaningful or meaning, is one, and ideally, right, I feel like, if I can make like a connection with, whether that's someone I served or whether that's another volunteer, that's often something that I would inspire, any events for folks to leave away with. But yeah, curious to see what
Yeah.
folks we're at 40%. So if you haven't put in your answers, please do. We'll see if we can get to at least 50% here. Oh, we're at 50. Perfect. Yeah, what do you think? Should we give a 10 more seconds or something
Yeah, a
like
few more seconds. And people, if you missed the poll and because you're not quite sure yet, you can always drop it in the chat as we go through today.
that? Absolutely.
All right.
And so here's the results. I don't know if you can see.
Actually can't see them. So I'm gonna
Okay, let me see if I can. pull that here. Let me, I'll boot you real quick, and
Yep.
then we'll toggle back here. So here are the results that we had. So
Awesome.
fulfilling, giving, community minded. Can you all see that?
It's a little small, but I think everybody can see. Yeah, impactful, meaningful, eye-opening. Oh, I like that one. There we go. Inspiring. Yeah, lots of impact, thoughtful, pride. Oh, I like that one. Sort of that sense of doing something that you're proud of or feeling good about that work that you're doing. Fun, rewarding, contribution to community. Yeah, really that connection. I sometimes think about volunteering as the way that people can sort of take action on issues or situations that they see in their community that might feel too big for one person to do it on their own, right? That we really think about connecting that desire to help with the action to help. And that's volunteerism, sort of as a definition. Warm, connected, valued, supported. I can really make a difference. Yeah, I really like these words. I think there's some themes coming through here. I think this can be a really great opportunity too to sort of ask your volunteers if you're doing those ongoing surveys or satisfaction surveys, or even just sitting down with a cup of coffee and asking your volunteers to share about their connection. And I'll tell just a quick story, and then we can go back to the slides. This topic for me really started because I had a volunteer reach out to me and she said, I really don't know. I've had good experiences and I've had bad experiences, and I don't know why. Like on paper, they should have all been good experiences. And oftentimes it's that motivation, right? Or that connection to the mission, that it might look right on paper or it might sound like it checks all those boxes for you. But if there isn't that connection, if there isn't that meaning, we may see volunteers sort of drift away. And that's also to say that not every role is for every person. So we do want to have those different kinds of opportunities. I think especially at VolunteerMatch, we feel that way. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. All right. So again, thinking about those words or thinking about that story that you want volunteers to tell. Now, before we jump in, I know what matters to my volunteers and why they volunteer with us. So sort of going back to that story that started this all for me is really thinking about, are you asking? Do you know why your volunteers are coming to you? Do you ask them what's exciting about this volunteer opportunity? Maybe mostly, like I try my best with my regular volunteers, but I've got volunteers that come and go. I don't always know why they're coming or if I'll see them again or if they're coming back. Somewhat, you maybe have an idea, but you haven't asked, or you don't keep track of that. And then not really, I haven't asked. And there's no wrong answer, right? We're all on a journey. We all come to this conversation at a different place in our journey. But Gung, if you want to go ahead and launch that poll, and this is just a quick voting poll.
Okay. Oh, we got a lot more respondents more quickly this time. It's a little easier to answer this one, I think.
Yeah, it is easy sometimes to just check that box, right? Nobody's asking you to type.
Yeah. So interesting. I was presenting yesterday, and one of the topics we talked about was doing volunteer interviews, and learning for them. And so we were talking about how many of these do you have to do to really get a sense. And we one of the numbers I shared was 7 is usually the most you really need to do, because after that you tend to not learn anything new necessarily. And so
Yeah.
so this is a great callback to that.
I like that, even if it's anecdotal, right? Because I usually say, like, the more you do it, the better you get at it. You sort of understand what the expected answer is, and
Mhm.
then when volunteers surprise you either in a good way or a bad way with their answers. But 7, I like that. I'm going to keep that.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
We'll end the poll here. Share the results.
I find this to be great. This is sort of, we're all sort of somewhere mostly in the middle of our journey, mostly in somewhat. I don't see anybody voting for not really, which is great. And again, there's, like I said, there's no right answer or wrong answer. It's all about where we're going and what works for the volunteers that we're working with, and for the work that we do, and how we engage volunteers. All right. So I want to see. Are we back on slides? Yes.
Ye-
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I want to share a video with you all. I really like this video. I will say, this is professionally produced. We have such an opportunity to tell stories now in video format. I think we saw a lot of that happen, especially early in the pandemic, with nonprofits getting on TikTok and sort of driving awareness and driving connections. But let's just watch this video. This is from CASA, which is a court-appointed special advocates. Again, this is a professionally produced video, but I think there's things we can learn from this, even if we're doing it on our own, that we can sort of learn about storytelling.
I am for the child who has been abused, the child who is afraid to go home,
who thinks it's her fault, who is forced to keep a secret or else.
I am for the child who has been neglected,
the child who does not know where his next meal is coming from,
who must fend for herself and her little sister
alone.
The child who has never been to a doctor or a dentist.
I am for the child who was taken away
for her own protection,
the child who is now in foster care, who does not know how long he'll be there,
or who these people are, or if she should trust them. I am for her.
The child who is in his 3rd,
4th, 5th,
6th foster home this year,
the child who has attended 4 schools in 2 years,
who sits in back of yet another class surrounded by strangers,
believing in his heart that no one
cares. I am for her. The child who has never been told
that he is loved,
that she is smart, beautiful,
talented,
worthy, that she is strong,
courageous,
that she is somebody. I am for her.
the child who one day will turn 18 and will be surrendered to the world.
I am for that child.
So I am there for that child.
To listen to her,
to speak for her,
to champion without compromise for what's in his best interest.
Because if I am
there for her, I know she will be half as likely to languish in foster care, and that much more likely to find a safe, permanent home.
she is the child I am for.
He is the child I am for.
They are the children I am for. She is the child I am for.
The child I am for is him.
Who am I?
Who am I?
Who am I?
I'm a CASA volunteer.
I am you.
All right, this one gets me every time. I've probably watched this, I don't know, a couple dozen times. And I think the amazing part of this story, right? It's this journey that we go on. And that's what makes this story, I think, so powerful, that there's this presentation of what it's like before, right? And some of it's statistics and some of it's numbers and some of it's that connection, some of it's that emotion that comes with this journey that we're going on, that then talks about that transition, what's different or better in these children's lives because of these volunteers. So we've gone on that story arc, we've outlined that problem, we've sort of built that need, and then there's this resolution. Here's how we help, here's how things are different, here's how things are better. And then that ends with that amazing call to action. Who am I? I am a CASA volunteer. I am you. And that, I think, makes that whole story journey worth it, right? Now, I will say, being a CASA volunteer is not for everyone, right? It's a lot of commitment. It's hard. It's emotionally hard. It's sometimes scheduling hard, I think. But this invites people in. It doesn't paint a rosier picture. I don't think it's pretty straightforward about the situation that some of these children are in, but it also talks about sort of that impact that you can have, that connection to community. Somebody put that in our first question today. So I just want you to think about this story as we go through today, as well as we think about the story that we tell to our volunteers, and where there might be an opportunity to do a little bit more of that connection, or tell a little bit more of that story in relation with.
I am for the child who has been.
There we go. So we're going to talk about getting past numbers. One of the things that I really like about that video, as I said, is that it is a combination of some statistics and some facts with some feelings and some connection. So oftentimes, as I said at the beginning, we talk about volunteers with numbers, right? This many volunteers, this many hours, this many clients. But that's just the quantitative stuff doesn't tell a whole story. When we add in some of those other pieces, again, what matters to our volunteers, their motivation, what they actually do, what's different, what have they accomplished, it starts to become a richer, a more compelling story, right? We tell stories because we want people to feel first educated and inspired, but also connected, right? And that's sort of what we do as, I think, as leaders of volunteers. We have our inspirational stories. We have I call them like the trolls under the bridge story, like what will happen if we're not here, or some of our cautionary tales that we might tell as well, to really help people connect emotionally, empathize with some of the work that we're doing with our organization, with the mission. So when we talk about getting past numbers, VolunteerMatch, we have a lot of numbers. One of the things that we do is we survey volunteers on a regular basis. We sort of ask them, what's motivating you? What do you want to do in your community? How do you want to volunteer? And they tell us overwhelmingly their top 2 reasons for wanting to volunteer are making a difference in their community and finding a cause they care about. And that's a really, I think it's a nice connection to some of the things we've already talked about. When we think about that, when we think about why volunteers come to us, and if we ask them, what do you want to get out of your volunteer experience? What are you hoping to accomplish with your volunteer time? We can start to see how we can help answer some of those questions. So when we track quantitative data, right, those numbers, how many volunteers, how many trees planted, how many meals served, that is such a limiting story, right? When we add in qualitative information, how people feel, what's motivating them, maybe even some numbers that go with connection. How long have your volunteers been with you? How many volunteers come back year after year? Again, thinking about that CASA story, there's definitely quantitative numbers in there, quantitative data in there, and numbers in there, but that is not a whole story. And we know that most volunteers don't volunteer for the hours. They're volunteering for something else. So again, at VolunteerMatch, we do these surveys. The other thing I want to share with you, and this is again an answer to, so that's why it adds up to more than 100%. We ask why people want to volunteer, to make a difference, to find a cause they care about. And then we ask them, when we're reviewing volunteer opportunities on VolunteerMatch, what are you looking for? Why are you selecting the opportunity that you selected? And overwhelmingly, they tell us it's because they feel strongly about the mission of the organization. So when we think about our recruitment messaging, especially if we're doing something online, or we have something on our website, or using a platform like VolunteerMatch, we don't want to just jump into what we need help with. We need volunteers who can come in on Wednesday and are available from noon to 4 to do X, right? That is the second one, sort of scheduling. But that overwhelming answer from volunteers is that they want to connect with the mission. So we want to tell them why this work matters, how they specifically can make a difference, and how they can change something in their community or change the life of a child, whatever your mission is, really pulling that connection together. So when we think about that, we can think about what informs our story now. And that was sort of my first question, which was, what story are you telling to your volunteers? We talked about what matters to our volunteers. Why do they come to you? What are they hoping to accomplish? Do they come in? I sometimes think about how long volunteers stay. Do they meet that minimum commitment that I ask for and move on, which is still success in my mind? Or are they sort of not always a great fit when they come in? Are we not giving them enough information when we tell our stories about what it's really going to be like? Hopefully, and I'm sure nobody on this webinar is doing this, but you're not doing that bait and switch where you promise one thing but you don't deliver that, or you feel like, I think this is again sort of an old-fashioned idea that you have to make your volunteers jump through hoops before they get to do the fun stuff or the good stuff. And I think this kind of inauthentic storytelling really does everyone a disservice. It does us a disservice, and it does volunteers, sort of sets them up to fail. They're not going to be well prepared. They're not going to know if it's going to be a good fit for them. As I said before, not every volunteer role is going to be right for every person. At VolunteerMatch, and sort of my personal philosophy on volunteer engagement is really thinking about finding that right match. So when I tell stories that educate and inspire, it's okay if the outcome from that story for that volunteer is, I don't know if this is the right place for me, or I don't think this is the right place for me, because I know not everybody's going to be a good fit. I'll tell a quick story. One of our most popular of all time volunteer opportunities on VolunteerMatch is for an organization here in California that matches volunteers with schools for after-school tutoring. And the title of their opportunity on VolunteerMatch is, "Are you good at math? ? Become a tutor." And that's such a great, like, self-selecting question, because if you're reading through that and math is not your thing, you're going to move on, right? They don't want people, they don't want every volunteer. They want volunteers who are not afraid to do math or really excited about math, good at math. They don't want those people who are like, oh, I never do math. So it really, telling a story that helps you find those right volunteers can be really powerful. One of the things, as I mentioned, is that mission is really critical. So when you think about how your organization tells its story in the community, and this might be something you don't have to do all on your own. You probably have hopefully a comms team or a fundraising development team that's doing some of this work too. You can borrow, you guys can work together and really figure out what it sounds like. What does your mission sound like in the community? What are your values? Maybe you have a mission, vision, values statement or goals that you talk about when you talk about engaging volunteers or serving your community. These are all really good things to include in our story. So things that matter to the volunteers that we have now, asking them, inviting them to share their stories with you. What matters to sort of volunteers in general. We saw some of that information from the surveys VolunteerMatch has done, but also just what you know from volunteers coming into your organization, what your organization values or prioritizes, and what your clients or your community, how are they helped by the work that you do? And if you can include clients in some of these stories too, depending upon who you're serving, that can also be powerful, both as a recruitment message, as well as when we talk about sort of building those relationships and we talk about recognition, that can be really powerful in there as well. And then, as I talked about today, really thinking about that story arc or that journey that this story takes us on. What's different or better because of the work that volunteers do in your organization? If you didn't have volunteers, what would your organization be limited to, or who wouldn't get served? What problem wouldn't get solved? So sometimes when we try to ask that question the other way, we can come up with the answer a little bit more easily. I think, especially for those of us who lead volunteers, sometimes we make it look really easy, and I always say it's that duck on a pond, right? With everything looks calm on the surface, but you're scrambling underneath to make sure it looks like that. Feet just going as fast as they can, and so when we do that, we maybe do ourselves a little bit of a disservice, because it really is meaningful work, but it's hard work. It's not easy to put all these pieces together. All right, we're going to switch over to talking a little bit about how we can share this story and how we can incorporate this in some of the work that we're doing. But I wanted to, yes, see if we had any questions come in, or anything that's coming to your mind as we sort of think about how we get past just telling the story we always tell.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, getting past the numbers, right? Certainly I thought you're so right. You know, people don't volunteer to just to get hours for the most part, minus your community service volunteers who are mandated to do that. But one question I had, we don't have any questions yet on the chat, but one question I had is, as we're thinking about telling these stories, a topic that's I've been, thinking about is, in terms of ethical storytelling, right? So there's that ownership of, oftentimes they're not our stories to tell, and it's somebody else's story, right? Unless it's your personal experience, and even with that, it might involve a client or someone that you're serving. And so, how do you think about that piece of it as you're creating these stories? What's your guidance on what stories to tell? How do you make sure that you're not doing harm in terms of taking someone else's story? Maybe they want you to tell, maybe they don't. Or how do you think about that, Jennifer?
Well, I think this is where we fall back on, absolutely asking first, right? I think, and asking in a way where no is an answer that's okay. And I think we can see this even when we mean well, right? Even when we think this is an amazing opportunity to recognize a fabulous volunteer or to highlight, a client that's come in and received services. We still have to ask. We don't assume that just because that story seems compelling to us that we are, we don't have to get permission. I think permission is first and foremost. And again, asking in a way that allows for that volunteer or for that client to share it to a level that they feel comfortable. I think there's also power in aggregated storytelling, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a real life person and their real life journey. When we have some of that connection, or if we understand our goals, we can frame that up in a way that really, I think, conveys the power of the work and the power of volunteers without it having to be about just one person, right? And we're trying to center the community. We can try to maybe decenter our organization and talk about sort of general societal problems and how we're addressing some of those. But it's a tough line to walk, especially if there's a deadline, especially if people get really enthusiastic and sort of push forward. It's one more thing that we as leaders of volunteers need to make sure that we are thinking about, because it is one of those things that can be risky. We want to make sure that we are protecting the safety and privacy of our clients and the safety and privacy of our volunteers before we're telling stories. So I do think there's a way through. Your organization's story will sound like your organization. It won't necessarily sound like any other organization. This reminds me of a I was working with two organizations doing really similar work, both but unconnected, right? So two organizations sort of supporting people in the United States who were either recently diagnosed with arthritis or had been living with arthritis. And the first one I was working for, they were talking about the things that they posted on their social media and the way they interacted with their the patients and the families of patients. And I made a suggestion to the second organization. Oh, this other organization has posted something like this. And this was an in-person meeting, and the whole room got really quiet. And I thought, oh no, something's gone wrong. And I said, you guys have some hesitations. What's going on? And they said, we would never post. I think it was something like the 10 things you learn to do with your toes when you have arthritis in your hands. And it was meant to be funny, but to them, it wasn't funny. They said, it sounds like we're making fun of our patients, or we're sort of picking on them. We would never post something like that. So two organizations with similar missions, but very different approaches. So there isn't necessarily a right way. There's a way that's right for your organization. And we understand how we connect, what our relationship is, what our organization sounds like, and that's the best way to tell your story.
Cool. Awesome.
All right. Yes. Ariana is saying, yeah, permission is key, and that we don't assume, that we don't just think that this, because we think that this is an honor, or that we think this is the best person to highlight in a story, that we don't get permission, and we don't find out where people are comfortable. All right, so we're going to talk about sharing that story. And there are lots of great resources out there if you do want to put together a video or something along those lines. I think there's so much tolerance out there now for amateur videos. People spend hours on Instagram and TikTok and all of those places. So don't feel like it has to be perfect. The story that you tell and get out there and share with the world is better than the story that you spend months or years trying to make perfect. The other thing I will say is the more you tell your stories, they will shift. You'll find what really works for you. You'll find the voice of your organization, or what your organization sounds like. And just to call back to my example story, I will say I think humor is hard, and it doesn't hit well always. So being authentic and coming from that authentic place rather than trying to do something humorous can oftentimes be the right way forward, right? Because our work is important, it does matter, and while there might be a role for some of that, especially internally, if we have volunteers that have struggle with things like compassion fatigue, maybe that gallows humor, or being able to relate to others or share some of the things that they can't necessarily share with people outside of the organization, it can be a good kind of connection or a good way to tell stories. It may not be appropriate externally. So that's what we're going to talk about, is sort of how do we craft these stories? Where do they go? I have one more poll here if we want to launch that. So, and this is a choose many, and if you pick if you're sharing your stories somewhere else, please feel free to put that in the chat. So are you sharing stories in your recruitment message or during orientation? Those internal communications up in your organization to leadership, to the board, out to other staff members, to other teams or other departments? Are you sharing your stories externally? This can look like our volunteers do great things. This could also be maybe some passive recruitment where we tell the story of volunteerism in our organization with an eye towards encouraging others. This could also fit into some of our fundraising messaging about how volunteers help us meet our mission or make a connection in the community. Volunteer recognition. again, what volunteers have done, thinking back to what matters to our volunteers so that we close that loop for them. We ask them what they want to accomplish or how they want to spend their volunteer time, and then we give them that back, right? This is how you've done that. This is how you've moved these needles. All right, maybe another couple seconds here. If you want to vote, get in now before we close this up.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, wow, that actually did drop quite a few folks. All right, we're
Sliding in
gonna end
under
the
the
poll.
wire.
That's right. Share results
Awesome.
here.
Yeah, so pretty well distributed here. Lots of internal and external communications. I love that if you're doing sort of a monthly roundup on volunteerism or cool things that you've heard from volunteers, sharing that internally. I always want my executive director to have that amazing story to tell when they're out in the community, when they are talking to funders, when they're talking to partners. I want them to have that, you know, in their pocket. I don't want them to have to think about why our organization succeeds by engaging volunteers. I want them to have those stories. And again, they can be 100% real based on a real person with their real name, or it could be this in general. We have a volunteer who does this, or we have clients who are served by volunteers in general in this way, with maybe some numbers, again, quantitative and qualitative information coming together to tell a great story. Fundraising, recruitment. I'm going to tell you guys, I think the little bit of why this work matters, how volunteers make a difference in your organization, or what's different or better in your community because of volunteers, is great recruitment messaging. Especially we look at VolunteerMatch, where someone might come in and get really kind of overwhelmed with the amount of opportunities that are in their community. That connection, helping you find those right volunteers, is really powerful. All right. Okay. So this last section here, I think, let's see. Yes. I get all these little pop-up windows. We're going to talk about putting this into action. So if we're sharing this story, how do we start to connect this? So as I said, my own little transition here, it can really make a difference for prospective volunteers. One of the things that I think, again, we all come from our own backgrounds. Everybody comes with sort of their own motivation for volunteering, or something about your mission or your organization resonates with them, but they don't always come in with expectations that match reality. Sometimes we have volunteers who think on day one they're going to be, you know, up to their elbows, building things or making change, and there might be an onboarding process or a learning process before those volunteers are hard at work or fully immersed in our organization. So when we talk about how volunteers work in our organization, we can really echo back some of those things that we hear from our current volunteers. And this is actually, if you've not done this, I find this to be really exciting and also really sometimes eye-opening. I ask, just sit down with your volunteers. It doesn't have to be formal. It can be if you have a large volunteer core and want to do this through something like a SurveyMonkey or an open form where they can sort of tell you a little bit about what they tell their friends and family about volunteering. So hear their stories, the way they tell them, and then reflect back that language that they use, the things that matter most to them, some of those terms that they use. I will say I've seen this happen in real life. We do a lot of work here with the California State Library System. And we were working with them in the beginning to recruit volunteers for their adult literacy programs. And we were all in on literacy and all of this work around some of these more formal terms. And I asked, so I said something along the lines of, you know, go back and talk to your volunteers and hear what they say, and then reflect that language back. And we got back together, and one of the leaders of volunteers said, I did that, and as I sat with my volunteers, just talking about what they do and what they share when they talk about the work that they do as an adult literacy volunteer, not a single one of them used the word literacy, right? Because that's kind of a formal word, or it's a jargony word. That they, it's not sort of an everyday word. They use words like reading and teaching and mentoring. So it's not to say we don't want to say literacy when we talk about recruiting volunteers and telling them about the work, but we also want to make sure we're using words like reading and teaching and mentoring, because that's sort of that connection. That's what makes sense to people. I talked a little bit about showing what's different or better because of the work of volunteers. So if time is our volunteers' most valuable resource, and that's what they're sharing with us, their time and talent, can we show them how investing some time with us can make a difference? Again, if we think about that CASA video, some of those numbers, maybe some research from your field or some studies can really help a volunteer say, yeah, you know what, this does sound like an investment of time, but it's worth it. And then again, what are your current volunteers getting out of that experience? What brings them back? I personally volunteer here in San Francisco with the Justice and Diversity Center, and we do some outreach to people who are unhoused, help them find legal counsel, and help them get citations removed from their records. And it is hard work, and I don't always feel appreciated by the clients, but I know that the organization appreciates me, and I know that homelessness is such an epidemic in this area. I can't solve that problem on my own, but I feel like I can give half a day every other month or so and really do what I can. So for me, even though I come home exhausted and sometimes people yell at me or worse, that I still know that when I go home, that like I'm doing what I can to try to make something a little bit better for somebody else. And that's something that you can share. What are your current volunteers getting out of that experience? Why are they picking your organization? Why are they spending time with your organization? Okay, with retain, think about this as relationship building. This could also be recognition. We want to think about impact storytelling. So again, what matters to your volunteers? What did they tell you they want to accomplish? And how did they get there? Or what difference did they make? Again, that idea of what's different or better. I think this is really a piece that sometimes gets dropped, is sharing information with your volunteers so you can help them tell their story. So first of all, we want them to be proud, right? Somebody said that, pride. We want them to be proud of the work that they're doing. But there's also sort of another sort of hidden benefit here, which is word of mouth recruiting. If you have volunteers who are excited and enthusiastic and inspired, and they have not just their personal connection to the mission, but they also have some additional information about what your organization is accomplishing or other ways that volunteers are out in the community. So if they do that direct after school tutoring, but you also have volunteers that are doing more maybe policy work or doing other kinds of community engagement, make sure your volunteers know what other volunteers are doing, that they can then say, oh, hey, I heard about this opportunity. I thought it might be a good fit for you, or you might want to learn more about this, so that they can share their story with others. Again, informally. I also think it's great when we can get our volunteers to share their impact stories on social media, either through our platforms or through their own. I don't expect my volunteers to be able to like recite my mission on command, but I do want to make sure that my volunteers know what my mission is and know how the work that they're doing supports that mission. Why does my organization do what it does? How does the work of volunteers support that mission? How can we do more or do what we do better because of the work of volunteers? And as we think about how we tie these stories back, right, when we think about recognition, I dropped my recognition pyramid in here, even though it's a little bit off topic, but I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. I'm almost done. Because I think it's really powerful to think about this, to think about where recognition happens and where we include our stories of impact, connections back to motivation and mission. I think of that sort of everyday bottom of the pyramid. Those happen most often every day that you see that volunteer, or in that moment when you've come to the end of the shift, or you've come to the end of the event, or you've accomplished that goal, that we're saying thank you, and that we're talking about how this builds on the work that's being done by others, or connected back to that mission or that moment. And I know for some of you, you have hundreds or thousands of volunteers that you engage. This does not just have to be you. This can be other volunteers, volunteers in leadership roles like shift leaders or team leaders. This could be other paid staff people. This might be clients. We might want to empower our clients to say thank you and reflect on connections. Next, we have sort of small wins with teams or groups. So this is not necessarily a big party or celebration. It might be. It might also be a debrief on how things are going. This might also be an update on this is where we are in this process, or hey, we've hit some bumps in the road. We need to come together and sort of regroup. Celebrating with all of our volunteers together. And I mentioned sometimes we tell stories that are not necessarily for public consumption. They aren't external stories. They're just internal stories. And these can be that sort of connecting about things that are hard, maybe a little bit of complaining or ranting. That can still be healthy for volunteers to be able to blow off steam a little bit. So I like to say at least once a year, we sort of, or maybe at the end of our busy season, we do sort of a debrief, feedback. These, again, don't all have to be parties. Asking for thoughts and ideas, asking for volunteers to help solve problems. These are all types of recognition. With all staff, so paid staff and volunteer staff, again, at least once a year, we do a big celebration. Maybe your executive director comes and talks about how they engage the work of volunteers in the community, or how they tell the stories. And then again, at least once a year with the community, that sort of external celebration of volunteers. So thinking about where stories fit in there and where we can pull all those things together. This last one here is really that last piece, right? Internal and external communications, where we tell the story of volunteer impact. And there's some themes, different or better because volunteers shared their time and talent. What would it be like if you didn't have volunteers? What ways have you engaged volunteers that wouldn't necessarily be expedient or appropriate for paid staff, right? People bringing in those skills-based or pro bono level volunteers that come in and really help us move needles in a short amount of time because they have 10, 20, 30 years of experience, or they're experts at something. Or where do we have those volunteers that, you know, are able to step in, that they have that flexibility in their life and their schedule, and they're able to come in when we need them and sort of get us out of the weeds, or help us solve a problem. There can be a sort of a hidden benefit, right? Passive recruitment. When we tell the amazing story of volunteers, that can help people think they want to volunteer, maybe with us, maybe somewhere else, hopefully with us. And there's a role here for fundraising success as well, telling the story of volunteers as a story that drives funding. I will also say there's a piece here for asking volunteers to give treasure as well as time and talent. And I think sometimes we hold back on that. We think they give so much already, but we never know where in our volunteers' lives philanthropy fits. So we might have a volunteer who wants to support our mission financially as well, and we probably have volunteers that are doing it already. And if you're not tracking that and coordinating with your development team to tell a special story to those volunteers, I think that's a missed opportunity. That's a whole other webinar. And then again, connecting that work of volunteers to the mission. Why do you do what you do? How do volunteers sort of, when we tell this story publicly or externally, how does that elevate the work of volunteers? And don't forget to elevate the work that you do too, as a leader of volunteers. This is not magic. This does not happen by chance. There's a lot of work that we do to support the work of volunteers and to engage volunteers and to keep them connected to our organization. Make sure you're telling that story too. All right, so our last poll here, and as we sort of wind down, making sure that you're sort of telling the story back to yourself. What ideas do you have? And they don't have to be fully formed, but what did you hear and think, oh yeah, I want to try that, or I want to explore that more? And this is, again, an answer for you. You can put it in the chat, you can put it in the poll question. And I'm happy to answer questions as well, if we had any questions come in.
I think we just had one from George who asked, if we, how can I get a volunteer who can assist me in my organization to nurture the needy children in the community? I of course suggested VolunteerMatch. I think Debbie suggested word of mouth, but I don't know if you had anything else to add.
Yeah, well, word of mouth is great. And until sort of 21, I think, or 2022, when we asked what's your best, most successful recruitment activity, word of mouth was #1. And sort of in the pandemic, online recruiting switched to #1 of our survey. And this is a survey to organizations that are using VolunteerMatch. So the fact that word of mouth was so powerful for so long, we know that there's lots of ways that volunteers come to your organization and get connected. And online recruiting and platforms like VolunteerMatch is just one. And I think I saw Ariana dropped that link in to getting started on VolunteerMatch. It's always free to set up an account on VolunteerMatch. Our basic account is free, and but we do have a premium membership, a pro membership, if you're looking for additional tools to better recruit volunteers. All right, it looks like we've got some answers, or at least an answer.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. I think the answer we got was asking volunteers to explain their experience and utilize that verbiage. So
Awesome. All right, well, that's the content I have, and I will stop sharing.
Yep. Well, thanks. That's awesome. I know we're here right at the hour, so I'll keep the rest sort of pretty quick here, so we can let folks go to your next appointment. But real quickly, for those that don't know about Civic Champs, we are a volunteer management platform, and we try to be there for every step of the process, and from recruitment and onboarding, scheduling, engagement, retention, pretty much everything that Jennifer mentioned today. We want to be there to support you. And so in particular for storytelling, one of the things that we find to be quite helpful is, we have a mobile app. It allows you to do very seamless check-ins here. But in addition to that, when people check out, we also collect reflections or feedback, which could be actually a great way to collect some stories. Now, they might be short, but if there's something that's interesting that sort of piques your interest, maybe an opportunity to reach back out to explore more, to say, hey, I saw you wrote this about your experience. Could we grab 10-15 minutes with you to learn more about your experience, right? And why you like, why you really enjoyed volunteering with us. So that's something that can be pretty unique. But if you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out to me, come to our website. And then you also have Jennifer's contact information here as well. So feel free to reach out to Jennifer. She has the link here for Learn. That's VolunteerMatch as well. So I think I'll speak on behalf of Jennifer and I, which is to say, we love meeting new folks. So if you want to LinkedIn and connect with us, I'm sure we'll both be excited to do that. And then finally, we're going to have, we're always looking for your feedback. And so if you can provide us some feedback. There's a link here. We'll put that in chat as well. But your thoughts on the presentation, if you liked it, you didn't, anything, suggestions you have for us. We're always looking for ways to improve our webinars. And so if there's something that you have to recommend, that'd be great. And then finally, freebies, like I mentioned. So Jennifer was very kind to share this with us, but the Learning Center has a ton of free resources, from webinars to recordings, resources, and even toolkits. And so we've hyperlinked everything here. So when we send out the presentation, you'll be able to just click on one of these links to reach the Learning Center and some of these fantastic resources. So with that, I think we'll kind of call it a close, since we're a couple minutes past the hour. But Jennifer, thank you so